Dear guests, honored ambassador, general coordinators, sir, welcome to the first panel. This activity is dedicated to promote the relations of India and Turkey. And that's why we have selected themes that could promote the resonation and interaction. In this sense, the first panel is dedicated for scrutinizing global and regional order. Order, I mean, that's the word magic. Because usually we aim building an order, though there are sometimes some shortcuts, sometimes escalations, and wars, conflicts, and disputes, but whatever the order. But it's a subjective term because order also designates order of one. I mean, not objective, but a subjective meaning is usually accumulated in it. In this sense, in this panel, we'll focus on order. First, I want to introduce our distinguished guests, and please forgive me if I pronounce the names in a wrong manner because it's not usual. By the way, on every Tuesday, I watch Indian soap operas together with my mother, 84 years old. So I know the signatures, you know. So I'm used to your culture, by the way, just through the soap operas. First of all, I would like to introduce Professor Chilamkuri Raja Mohan. I will just summarize the great background because, yes, because they are really distinguished and very long bio because of the accumulation of experience, education, dedication, and workload. I believe he's academic, he's journalist, he's a foreign policy expert. I would prefer researcher because researcher is much more better in terms of using a word. And also, he's working for the Institute of Asian Studies, if I'm not mistaken, and he will touch the word or concept change. Our second speaker is Professor Gürol Baba. He's from Ankara Social Sciences University. Welcome, Professor. He's focusing on middle powers, Asia-Pacific region, Turkish-US relations, Turkish-Australian relations, and he will talk about geostrategic convergences and diverging priorities. Dr. Nandan Unnikrishnan. He's a very distinguished journalist. He's actually a researcher on Indian-Russian relations. So his focus is Eurasia, if not mistaken. And also, he will present his ideas in the frames of peace, prosperity, and stability in Eurasian and Central Asia region. And finally, we have Professor Yücel Acer, Professor of International Law at Yıldırım Beyazıt University. And he's also an expert on maritime disputes and conflict studies. So I welcome all. And I would like to start with Professor Mohan regarding change and word. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you, Chen. And it's really a pleasure to be here this morning with all of you. I want to begin by thanking the organizers, SETA, our embassy, and our partners from India, the think tanks. It's really great to be part of a project which wants to rebuild India-Turkey relations. I'm not an expert on Turkey, but having seen in the last few days, some in the research on this subject, it's amazing that two of us have allowed small differences to derail our partnership. That in the morning we heard both the ambassador and the deputy minister, that we allowed, I think, minor differences. Sometimes we say in English, the narcissism of small differences. What divides us is so small, but yet, and we've allowed that to undermine the efforts to build a solid relationship. My sense is today what we heard from the ambassador and the minister, at least shows a political commitment to build that relationship again. And I think is really, I wish all of you great success. What I want to say is that whatever the past was, that today in the changing international system and in the changing position of India and Turkey itself, so two things have changed, or three, shall we say. There is no order actually. There is great disorder under the heavens. Whatever order that we thought we had post 1991 is breaking down. Second, I think the change is the transformation of the global economy, global geopolitics that's unfolding. And third is the relative rise of India and Turkey in the international system. That is, we're not what we were in the middle of the 20th century. We are different today, and both of us then have a lot more in common. But there'll also be new frictions beyond the old frictions. So managing the frictions as well as finding new convergences, I think, is the opportunity that we have today. So what I want to do is really just make four broad points. I think the first one on the great disorder that is unfolding on the global order. Second, a bit on the geo-economic transformation that is taking place. And three, how the shared neighborhood between India and Turkey that's also changing. And finally, to look at how India and Turkey, the kind of transition that we can think of in this changing world. Firstly, I think those of you who've seen the UN General Assembly vote 2 days ago, US voting with Russia and Russian friends, including North Korea, Ethiopia, and the Europeans forming a majority in the General Assembly, defeating an American-Russian resolution. I think it's just a taste of things to come. So the assumptions we made about what divides the major powers, how they're going to relate to each other, every one of those assumptions is going to change. So a lot of the challenge for us would be unlearning our assumptions about the world. Certainly after Mr. Trump has come, I think this is a completely different world. A world in which much of the conventional wisdom, both post-1945 conventional wisdom as well as post-1991 conventional wisdom, is going to be undone. Therefore, we need to be prepared for that big change. Second, I think on the economic side, what we're seeing happen is really the breakdown of the global economic order, the globalization system that was built from the 1990s and which culminated in the creation of the World Trading Organization in 2000. That system today is going to come, is already cracked, is already dead. His question is dead but not buried. What already you see countries moving to form bilateral reciprocal trade pacts rather than going to Geneva to negotiate a single global system. Here again, what the US is doing and what China has done in weaponizing interdependence, those factors I think today are with us. Therefore, the notion of the economics, that there is a stable globalizing economic order, we can all prosper within it under certain set of rules, that is breaking down. So therefore, we are in a completely different place. Linked to that failure of the WTO, I think, is also the failure of the multilateral institutions. We all love multilateralism, but multilateralism has never been as weak as it is today. That today the focus is on smaller groupings, on like-minded coalitions, and not even the old alliances like NATO have much meaning today, given what is happening. So I think this is a completely different context in which countries like ours, emerging powers, rising powers, whatever you want to call Turkey and India, so we need to find new ways of dealing with this world. And I think one of them must necessarily be cooperating with each other. A third point I wanted to mention is really that the shared neighborhood between us, what was narrowly conceived as Middle East and South Asia in the past, today is much wider. Given the Turkey's expanding role in Africa, in the Middle East, in Caucasus, in Eurasia, my colleague Unnikrishnan will talk about the bigger picture on the regional side. But the fact is, today the weight, the salience of Turkey in this expanded region, in economic terms, in military terms, in power projection terms, in peacemaking terms, has dramatically increased. Similarly, India too, and I think today looks beyond South Asia, looking to expand its own influence in the Indian Ocean, in the Middle East, in Africa. So therefore, I think what we're seeing is really a widening regional footprint of both India and Turkey that has unfolded. So for that brings us, I think, to a new context in which we can work together. So you tell me when I'm 2 minutes short. Yeah. So that brings me to the last point I wanted to say, that how did the international system divide us in the past? So if we go back to right at the beginning of the Cold War, the Turkey chose NATO, India chose non-alignment. And for whatever reasons, I mean, we don't have to go into it. But today, if you look at it, we were seen as pro-Russia. I think today, Turkey does more cooperation with Russia in the region than we do. We used to say, look, Turkey was too much pro-American in those days. A lot of people reciprocate the compliment to India today. India has become very pro-US. India is part of a Quad, part of things we do with the US, things which we did not do before. So therefore, the old divide between alignment and non-alignment looks irrelevant today. While Turkey is still a member of member of NATO, has a policy which you might call multi-alignment. It's actually pursuing its interests through wider means. Similarly, India is technically non-aligned, sorry, with apologies to the ambassador, but its relationship with the major powers today, we use the phrase occasionally, multi-alignment. India is close to US, it's close to Russia. We have problems with China, but overall, we manage this relationship in a different way. Second, I think, so therefore today we are in a completely different place. And I think we need to understand that. So therefore the differences in terms of the global order that presents have significantly reduced. Second, I think we have this, I mean, I'll be frank, the Pakistan issue, how the partition played out and how it related to Turkey. But today I think India is looking beyond Pakistan. And I think similarly, Turkey too should look beyond Pakistan, I think, in building a relationship with India. I don't think, with my personal view, we should object to Turkey's relationship with Pakistan. Nor, you know, the issue is that when one relationship is used to create, you know, on disputes between the other two parties, that's when the problems come. But my sense is, again, this is the issues involved are so small relative to the new possibilities that exist as today. So therefore, they will be there. That friction will be there. But I think what we've done in the last few years with the United States, with Saudi Arabia, with the Emiratis, including with the Chinese, I would dare to say, that Pakistan is a less salient factor today in our relationship with Pakistan's best friends, historically. So therefore, I don't see that should be an issue for us. I mean, I think you do what is in your interest, we do what's in our interest, but we'll try and find ways to reduce that friction where there is. Finally, I would say in the region, as expanding Turkey's influence, expanding India's influence, there will be. We'll be rubbing it against each other, sometimes in Eurasia, sometimes in Indian Ocean, other places. Here again, because we don't do enough with each other, that these differences seem so large. But if we do more with each other, on counterterrorism, on security, on maritime cooperation, on blue economy. So the line of cooperation would be longer than the line of differences. You know, in school, occasionally you were asked to, how do you make this line shorter? Is by drawing a line that is longer than the one that you have. Therefore, if you expand the areas of cooperation between us, the differences, I think, will look that they're minimal, they're not really central, that they're not really life-threatening in any way to the relationship. Finally, I would say that as we look ahead, I think in this post-Trump's world, in a period of changing great power relations, in a period of breaking down of global economic order, and in a period of technological revolution, which is actually transforming the way we do things from the smallest research is what we do to the nature of the global economies, the nature of production, and their distribution around the world is going to change. So therefore, I think as two large middle powers, I would say, I think India is still a middle power, that there is here today for us in this world to improve our relative position further in the international system. Expanded cooperation between ourselves will provide the basis for us to move together, and both of us advancing, rising up the hierarchy without having to, tripped up by small differences. So I would say time has come to look ahead, to deal with the world as it is, from first principles, as opposed to looking at the past. I think that's where we are, and I think that's why I think this project is good. Let's take a look at first principles, our interests, how we resolve the friction that comes in some regional areas, look at the convergences that come at the global level. If we do that, I think both of us will benefit from this relationship. So really, for me, it's really Turkey is the missing link. Whatever I mean, I'm speaking from as a student of Indian foreign policy. It's amazing that we don't have a normal relationship with Turkey. That for India, I think it is a missing link of India's own ambitions in the region and in the world. Therefore, irrespective of what the problem is, my advice to the Indian government, if they ask me, is look, don't tell me about the problem. Tell me about the solution. How do we build a different relationship with Turkey? And I think what are the possibilities? My sense is hopefully this project will actually outline some of the bilateral ways. I'm not going into the bilateral relationship itself, but the global context, but the regional context, the technological context, all today have put us in a place where we need to start afresh from basic principles of what we can do together. So I'll stop here, Chairman.
It becomes like a trauma, a sudden change, a great change. Sometimes it's gradual. That is, or that can be manageable. In this sense, traumas change the norm and orders. That's a fact. So as you may have agree, and you have mentioned the three issues that you have delineated, the great disorder, economy, and shared neighborhood are the ones maybe that may soften the tone of change if there is a common shared least understanding, I believe. So we have to move maybe to the second speaker, Professor Gürol Baba, because he is focusing on geostrategic convergences and diverging priorities in a multipolar world. Last night it was 1 o'clock a.m. and a TV channel called me just to discuss multipolarity. It was interesting. 1 a.m. I don't know how many watched it, but it was interesting because it's an issue should be discussed. What we mean by multipolarity, multicentrism, regionalism. Well, otherwise, if we do not put the concepts in a correct order, then we can confuse what the order is. So, Professor, please, the word is on you. Let's learn the multipolarity.
Well, thank you, Yücel. I think it's working. I would like to thank all of you, each of you, for making this, I think, very valuable congregation possible. I would like to particularly thank Professor Mohan to pave the ground for me regarding drawing a dark gray picture. I'll try to lighten up that gray, and I'll try to bring up more of a light gray picture. I can't make it white because there is no white anymore, but I'll try to make it lighter gray. Well, we all know that there is a transformation of the international system. I would like to draw a reverse pyramid for you, which will focus on 3 levels. We call it in IR as the levels of analysis. The international system, where I'm going to talk about the transformation of the international system, and also I will touch upon the role of South-South cooperation in this transformation of international system. Secondly, I'll go down a little bit further down, narrow down to the regional level, which, well, I'm going to talk about Indo-Pacific. I am pushing up this term both in the academic circles and also as much as in the MFA, because it is a term which can bring India and Turkey with other powers in the region on a conceptual and also practical basis. I'm going to give it a double reading. And finally, I'll go down really the narrow part of the pyramid as the state, Indian state, and the Turkish state. Well, the transformation of the international system, as we all know, that has been happening for more than 2 decades very vividly. And it happens in the sense that we are moving from a dominant Western type of a quote-unquote order. I think we all agree that we don't really much of an order these days. But anyway, so there is the order, and we are moving from this Western order to a more of a non-Western order. Well, India and Turkey are a part of this non-Western order. And in this transformation, there's quite a few layers. Let me just touch upon a few of them. For example, the economic resurgence of the global south. Well, obviously there is China, there is India, there is Turkey, there is Brazil, there is Indonesia. And we also see, as I say, the declining of the Western influence. Don't take this influence like the dominance, but like a rule maker, that we don't see West as a real, full-fledged rule maker anymore. And we see, you know, the 2008 financial crisis, also the intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the outcomes of those interactions basically tells us that there is not much of a Western rule maker. Multilateralism in the non-West is much more numerous and becoming more and more effective than the West. Shanghai, BRICS, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which focus on economic pragmatism and state sovereignty rather than pushing Western liberal norms. Well, when I say norms, I would like to put my hands on it because norms is about culture. I'm going to touch upon this cultural aspect when I was talking about the Turkish Asia anew, which I'm also in one of the teams that will trying to reconceptualize it, because Asia is not necessarily new for Turkey. It's a very important geocultural connection. It goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, during the Ottoman era. So we look at the future of international order in this transformation. There are three important elements that we can talk about. Hybrid norms. No more we are actually patching ourselves through the Western norms, but the norms are getting more and more hybrid. There is more institutional pluralism, which is a part of the developing multilateralism in the non-West. And also, well, a bit more of a dark gray side of the picture, there is geopolitical competition and cooperation. When we say cooperation, let me use it as a bridge to talk about the South-South cooperation and how it actually operates within the transformation of the international system. There is South-South cooperation, and that South-South cooperation does not necessarily rely on North-South cooperation mechanics. This time there is less dependence, more solidarity, more understanding, and more normative type of convergence, as we are witnessing today here. And in this South-South cooperation, there is one important element that when I'm wrapping up my presentation that I'm going to use, that is called triangular cooperation. That's where Turkey and India has a very important commonality, because Turkey and India, they can be labeled as quote-unquote swing states. This is a new term. Don't take it like a very easy movement on a pendulum between global north and the global south. It's much more than that. It requires capabilities and which should be honed by skillful diplomacy. We see it more precisely and more vividly in India's interactions with global north and global south in Indo-Pacific. Not that much in Turkey's diplomacy yet, but fingers crossed for that. And the other point that I would like to go down is that the region. Transformation of the international system, if you may order, is not necessarily global. It is regional. In other words, the transformation of the international system in the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, well, Western Europe, the EU zone, they are different from each other. And in this regional transformation, the element that I would like to touch upon is Indo-Pacific, not Asia-Pacific. Although when people are spelling out my bio, they say he's working on Asia-Pacific. No, I'm working on Indo-Pacific, all right? And there is a reason for that. This is not me only, huh? This is a transformation which we easily see in the region, in the sense that Indo-Pacific is becoming a more of a geopolitical and economic discourse. It's not only a terminological change or a terminological transformation. It's related to this all global power dynamics, economic networks, and strategic alignments. Why is it that important? Well, it is important because of challenging two cliches. Well, the first cliche about Indo-Pacific is that it's an American concept. No, it's not. Secondly, it's a concept peculiarly trying to contain China. No, it's not. Well, every year, at least like 2 or 3 months, I'm teaching at China at Duke University in Shanghai. And this is where I talk to my Chinese colleagues that when they say, well, Indo-Pacific is not a concept that we particularly like, but we don't particularly dislike it either. I mean, it's not something that we see. At the beginning, it was like an American concept, but look at it today. Indonesia, Malaysia, well, EU, they are all patching into this Indo-Pacific concept. In Turkey, we are have a bit of a traditional, let's say, coyness when it comes to new concepts. I'm not subscribing to that. So when I'm saying Indo-Pacific, I am taking Indo-Pacific as a rim-to-rim extended region which can bring South Asia, Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, East Asia, well, eastern part of Africa to the western parts of America all together. So it is like a construct like Global South, and that could be a very important platform, at least a conceptual platform, which could bring Turkey and India together. As I say, the second cliche, let me just touch upon it very briefly, to contain China. Well, it's not. If you look at it, the development of the concept from 2007 to 2021, so from Japan to the EU, you will see it, well, it's a concept which doesn't have a Cold War connotation of deterrence or containment. It's a concept of economic integration, transformation, and interconnectivity. I think these are the concepts that we can focus on, even like in the second track type of attitude. Last level, the state level. This is our level. In the state level, I think we communicate here. Although we are on the individual level, but still we are doing it on the state level. Well, in the state level, Turkey and India interestingly share commonalities and they have common peculiarities. Well, Indo-Pacific is one area that we, as the Turkish students of international relations of diplomacy, there is a lot to learn from India's skillful diplomacy between realpolitik and flexibility. And the key word here is at the same time. That's our key word here, okay? Because India works with, well, China in the Chinese-dominated platforms, at the same time Quad, well, at the same time Australia, and at the same time Vietnam and Philippines, and also with Europe. I saw the EU's Global Gateway Initiative and India-EU Trade and Technology Council at the same time means swinging. So India has been swinging between Global North and Global South, and it's an important, like a triangular relationship where Turkey can subscribe into in diplomatic practice. Well, here, as I said, Asia and EU, I'm going to touch upon it about to finish. In Asia and EU, it's not new because there is a geocultural link which goes back to the beginning of the 20th century Sultan Abdülhamit's times to develop soft power in Indo-Malay world. And that soft power didn't really work, but we have these geocultural connections still operating there. And today, when TICA and other, government agencies operate there, the most important platform is that geoculture. I think we can talk a lot more about the bilateralism in the closed session, but there is one more keyword that I would like to touch upon. That's called complementarity. That's my light gray picture. So complementarity, Turkey can bring construction, textile, automotives, conventional warfare, and equipment, and complement India's strengths in information technology, pharmaceuticals, and services. Not only that, non-traditional security threats that Turkey bring complementarity to India. I think that's a very important part, like counterterrorism, particularly as a NATO member and a key player in the Middle East. And once we bring these three elements together, triangular cooperation, swing states, and complementarity, it gives us a very vivid picture. apart from the conflicts, apart from the misalignments, I don't want to use the term conflict, by the way, let me revise myself. Let's say misalignments between the two countries. I think through this complementarity, there is a lot to be done. And I'm hoping that this could be, at least in the second track, the first step of this. Sorry about timing, if I had.
No, you are on time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
You know, reverse triangle, South-South relations, Indo-Pacific region, and state-state relations. I think that was the overall structure of the presentation, and thank you so much. And civic state conceptualization is really interesting because it's one of the emerging concepts right now in international politics. On the other hand, maybe linked to this discussion, the next one is about peace, peace, prosperity, and stability in Eurasia and Central Asia. And we will have the Indian perspective on it from Dr. Nandan Unnikrishnan. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Firstly, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this prestigious forum. And I don't mean it merely to praise something, but I genuinely think that this is a seminal beginning. I hope the two governments actually work harder on this and take this forward, because the potential clearly between India and Turkey is enormous. And changing that potential energy into kinetic, I think, is something that is the need of the hour. I am also grateful to the previous speakers and the previous panel, because they have essentially destroyed whatever notes I had made by mentioning everything that I was planning to speak about. And this has a positive. It allows me to just stream of consciousness some random thoughts to you. The other is I can also give up. I don't need 15 minutes. But let me start on a more serious note. As was mentioned by many of the previous speakers, Eurasia too is not immune to the changes that are taking place in the world. The powers in Eurasia are also busy recalibrating. And obviously, in the Eurasian region, the powers need to recalibrate, because two of the big powers, namely Russia and China, reside geographically in the region. And of course, we all know that the United States has a larger-than-life presence in this particular area. But while at one level, it may appear to be a crisis that there is a recalibration going on at the global level and changes in the relationship between former adversaries, I think for smaller players, and my previous speaker particularly was, I think, very clear on this, there is in this crisis a certain amount of opportunity that arises for the smaller, as now is popular to use the term middle powers, to look for collaborations with each other. Now, whether, I mean, you want to put a nomenclature on it, call it South-South cooperation or call it anything else, that is up to you. Be comfortable with what you want. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that the middle-level powers, their strength will be greater and greater vis-a-vis the greater powers if their strength and collaboration within each other is improved. They will then become genuinely the swing states that the previous speaker was talking about. And while this recalibration is taking place, it is also important to note that, in my opinion, and I am totally open to being corrected on this, the economic relationship has acquired between these middle powers, and between the rest of the powers too, the economic relationship has acquired a significance, a greater significance than earlier, primarily because, as Dr. Rajamohan pointed out, there is a breakdown in the, this great project of globalization that took place. There is a breakdown in the functioning of major economic institutions, to put it simply, as it's become a cliche to say, is all the institutions that were particularly on the economic side that were built after 1945 seem unable to function in the way they were designed to function. Now, in this context of to put it simply again, you have a situation where the rules are changing in the political landscape. There is a breakdown of a kind in the economic landscape. It is important that powers like India, powers that like Turkey, reimagine their relationship. They have to look at each other not from the prism of the past. If we look at the prism of the past, our relationship between these two countries cannot take off. There are too many deadweights hanging on us. But if we look at this beyond that, if we look at it afresh and look at it as something that we need to build, again, Dr. Rajamohan talk of making a longer line and a shorter line by drawing a longer line next to it. If we look at that, we will find that there is tremendous potential, and particularly in the area of Eurasia. What is Eurasia from an Indian perspective? From an Indian perspective, Eurasia is part of its extended strategic neighborhood. India's interest, of course, there is security interest, there is economic interest, there are ancient cultural links. There is also a more immediate fear, is that we do not want any one country to dominate this region. Now, if you look at all these factors that I described from an Indian perspective, I think there is none of those that Turkey will find antagonistic or hostile. Turkey will share all these. Now, where is the problem then? So the problem obviously is partly our history. We can't get rid of it. We have to move on. But the second is that countries like India, who have, I may be a little self-critical, the ambassador here will forgive me. Countries like India who have global aspirations, who see themselves at the global table, will have to also recognize that their footprint, let's say in an area like Eurasia, and I mean the broader Central Asian, West Asian region, is significantly lighter than the footprint that Turkey has. Turkey in the past 2 decades has made tremendous strides in turning out to be a significant player in this region. I have seen this because I have been following Central Asia, and I have seen how from the 90s onwards, Turkey has developed a very strong relationship with the Central Asian countries. I've also seen India open embassies in the Central Asian region in 1991. I mean, as soon as these new republics were formed, 1992, to be more precise. And I have at the same time seen how India's footprint, while we are trying to increase it, has fallen behind, let's say, the one that Turkey has. So India has to learn that if it wants to play a significant role, one of the ways of doing that is to try and collaborate with some of the established powers, those who have a larger footprint. And here we need to learn that Turkey is not someone that India looks at as a traditional partner in this area. But maybe we need to change the way we look at this particular point. We need not allow, from an Indian perspective, our northern neighbor or northwestern neighbor and Turkey's relationship with that country to come in the way of evaluating what is our relationship with Central Asia. So if I look at the Indian understanding and what India brings to the table, here I would agree with Professor Baba, is that India at the same time is displaying an ability to walk on multiple planes at the same time. It's true, India is a member of BRICS, a founding member of BRICS. India is a member of the SCO. India is a founding member of the Quad. Now, these are diametrically, in many ways, different platforms. They have different aims. But India is able to operate at all these planes. And this is something that India could bring to the table for Turkey. Turkey's interest in the Indo-Pacific, which I'm hearing just now, could be easily facilitated by greater cooperation in this area with India. So, in the end, I would like to say that, you know, it is to the advantage of both India and Turkey to develop a program of understanding and cooperation in the Eurasian region that works towards developing a multipolarity in this particular area, not allowing the emergence of any single dominant nation. Now, I know that many of us, particularly the Indians in the audience here, think that I am speaking about China, and this is one of my anti-Chinese tirades. That's not actually the case. I am saying that in the global context of the changing world, there will be many areas in which India will have to collaborate with China too. So I think India has to make a series of adjustments, but so does Turkey. That's the lesson that I'm bringing here. All of us need to be a little bit more self-critical and look at us. And yes, of course, we will be driven by our self-interest. And there's nothing wrong in that. But in that forward movement of our self-interest and a new relook at ourselves, I think there is a potential for us to find a common language. And the final piece of personal advice, if you want, to be able to focus on areas of cooperation, we need many more such dialogues. These dialogues will have to take place with much greater intensity. But one thing I discovered, particularly through the interactions India had with Central Asian countries, is that it is important, and I'm not talking of bringing officials into these dialogues. I am saying it is important to bring business into these dialogues. Because if you don't bring business into this dialogue, what we have in the new world, where there is an economic foundation to building the rest of the relationships, that will not get developed. So we must look at ways and means on how we can advise to get Indian and Turkish businesses to talk to each other. The moment that happens, I think that line will get significantly shorter. Thank you.
Professor, thank you. Eurasia is the geography that all discussed for most centuries. We remember the concept, the Great Game, invented by the, Great Britain and also Russians. And today we are in a process of collaborating over there. So let's wish luck. On the other hand, there is another issue should be discussed in this panel, and I will give floor to Professor Acer. It's about the UN. India is a very distinguished member of the United Nations, a great population, demography, and a political power. On the other hand, there were demands from the Turkish side for the last 1 decade on transforming or reforming the United Nations. So I will give floor to Professor Acer, and we will try to understand exactly what is meant by the UN reformation. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Murat. And also I would like to thank the organizers from SETA, Turkey, and from India side. I am aware that that's a very special occasion, quite simply because that we have not done enough to explore the relations between India and Turkey so far. This is despite the fact that in our world with multipolarity, I think we need to explore the relations between two countries even further than ever, because, there is a great chance of conflicts in our time, but there is also a great chance of cooperation as well. we are living in such an interestingly, diverse world, and which I can call as a lawyer as a wild world. And I think that's going to be a quite political definition of the situation from the legal perspective. I have to say that, in our world, the very fundamental and major issue is actually the lack of order, lack of legal order. That's the fundamental of everything. Although we are still talking about with reference to the power of balance, like multipolarity, we are all aware of the fact that that's not going to be the solution for a just world, simply because there is a lack of system. When I say that there is a lack of system, I don't mean that there are not legal rules. Of course, thanks to the Third World, after the Second World War, thanks to the newly independent countries, including India, we have wonderful set of legal rules now, which are quite just in terms of protecting the weak against the powerful countries. The problem here, there's no system to apply these wonderful rules, because the application of the legal rules all depend on the power, because there is no system of enforcing the legal rules. So that's why I say that that's a very fundamental problem for our world, to establish a system that would apply these legal rules, which have been developed with an enormous effort of newly independent countries, especially after the Second World. So how to establish a system which is going to be, quite effective in applying the legal rules? Of course, inevitably, we look back to the United Nations. We have the only global organization. There's no other chance other than looking at the United Nations. United Nations has not been established as a simple organization. It has been established as a core of protecting international peace and security. All other issues, including human rights and economic, justice, protecting the poverty against poverty, and all other issues are actually significant simply because they are all related to protection of international peace and security. When I say international peace and security, of course we look at the Security Council as a part of the system of protecting international peace and security. It was established with a set of only 51 countries in 1945. As the number of the states increased in the world, then the UN system has started to deteriorate in terms of protecting peace and security. That's why there have been always an effort to reform the United Nations, to make it more powerful against the aggressions. And I can safely say that it started with an enormous effort in 1990s, after the collapse of the bipolar system. Of course, there are very fundamentals of these reform efforts, like reducing the bureaucracy, increasing the transparency, making the United Nations more effective in terms of talking to the countries and these kind of issues. But the protecting peace and security is always the very fundamental of these reform efforts, and that means reforming the Security Council. Actually, that's the fundamental issue. So far, India and Turkey have been working on different paths in terms of reforming the Security Council. This doesn't mean that Turkey and India was actually working against each other in terms of reforming the United Nations. I know that India has been following a different path and Turkey has been following another path, actually they have the same end to reform the UN to make it more powerful to represent the rest of the world, maybe make it more, balanced in terms of representing the different cultures and, religious and many other diverse elements of the world. There are a lot of technical details. I'm not going to give these details, and that which is not really necessary at the moment. But I can say that 3 different proposals have been always voiced. I think the first one is increasing the number of the members of the Security Council. Of course, India, like countries like India, Brazil, and maybe Japan and Germany wanted to be a member of the Security Council, possibly with a veto power. And some African countries should also be represented in the Security Council. And countries with dominantly Muslim populations, and their numbers are more than 50 countries, and they are not represented in the Security Council either. So there should be representation of the Muslim countries in the Security Council as well. So these kind of approaches to increase the number of the Security Council to make it more representative is one approach. Another is that, increasing the member of the Security Council without a veto power, which is voiced by, as you can guess, by the powerful countries which are already members of the Security Council with veto powers. They don't want to see another country with a veto power in the Security Council. A third approach is actually focusing on to make United Nations General Assembly more powerful. Uniting for Consensus, sometimes a nickname for a group of countries, they follow a different path to make the United Nations a just organization and more effective organization. We can discuss whether it fits to the realities of our world at the moment, but there is an ideal for the United Nations that the General Assembly should be more powerful than the Security Council. That's the approach of Turkey, for example. But in the end, India and some other countries, especially non-aligned countries, including India, really wanted to see a just world. As Ambassador said, India is a friend to the world. But then, this is the same aim of Turkey, to make the world order more equitable and just. That's the fundamental aim. There are a lot of proposals by Turkey to make the United Nations, more effective and a just organization. All of them are actually aiming at this point. So that's why, as a conclusion, like many other fields, India and Turkey has a great potential of cooperation in terms of reforming the United Nations to make the world order just and more equitable and more representative. That's, I think, one of the very significant areas of cooperation between two countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. The striking phrase that I have noted, well, there is no system right now to apply rules. I think that's the essence of the overall speech. In this sense, thank you for the proposals on how to reform the United Nations. They were really specific. Now it's time to have questions from the audience. I was planning to have questions, 3, but okay. Thank you for the assistance. The first question comes from, I don't know, why Turkish image is so negative in India? That was the first question. So I think it must be on you to answer this question. And how to mend it or how to promote it. I think that's the continuity. Another question, if I can read the script. How can India and Turkey draw lessons from the historical economical ties to develop innovative financial strategies and trade policies? So that can go to you, sir. Sorry, I can't read this. Sorry. Professor, the differences between, sorry, I can't read it. Would you please? Yes.
South Asia talk about difference between India and Turkey, and some of those are absolute red lines, and some of those differences also activate about this. It would be great if you could frankly express what those red lines are and why. But that's also perhaps India's perception, sorry, Turkey's perception.
Thank you.
I think this why is Turkey's image negative is because there's no interaction. If you limit yourself to arguments between the two foreign offices on two issues, and there is no real B2B cooperation, there's no people-to-people cooperation, then the only image that is constantly comes out in the media, etc., is simply the two questions, two red lights. I mean, you could have said it, one is Pakistan, one is Kashmir, right? I mean, so the public discourse is just focused on these two issues. But as this morning Ambassador was saying, if you see the full flights of 300 people in an Indigo flight landing from Delhi to Istanbul, something is changing. So I think the more interaction you have, the more you understand each other. There are governments, of course, there are elite level understanding. Then you learn to put some of these differences in their proper perspective. Red light or no red light, those are differences that are real. Same thing, we had the same issue with the United States, which actually wanted to mediate, just like a lot of other countries wanted to mediate. Today, US doesn't talk about it. We had the Brits who are the closest to Pakistan, going back to partition from the kind of relationship they had. Today, Britain takes a different view because Britain finds its interest in India today are much bigger than its interest in Pakistan. So let me just point out, today, right up to 1990s, Pakistan was a faster growing economy. It was better placed globally. But today, what's happened post 1990, Pakistan's economy has stagnated. That today it's stuck at $350 billion GDP for almost 5-6 years. Mostly negative growth rate, zero growth rate. So in a way, Pakistan has lost its way. So it's not something, to celebrate. It's not something to, but that's a fact. Every interlocutor of India and Pakistan says, look, there was a time when the US president, if he came to India, he would have had to go to Pakistan. Now, you see, in the last 4 years, the Biden administration didn't even put a phone call to the Prime Minister or the President of Prime Minister of Pakistan. So countries operate on the basis of interests. So as long as you have interests that are in play, then these differences will take their proper perspective. Same thing with China. China has to support actually radical positions on Kashmir. It modulates it since 1990. It has modulated it. Today we have $120 billion trade with China. That makes a difference. So I think that's where I said we need to build a bigger relationship in which the differences will be there. I mean, I'm not saying these differences will disappear. I'm not asking Turkey to change its position on Kashmir. The question is, it finds its proper place in the context of an expanding relationship. Finally, I would say, look, finally the India-Pakistan stuff, look, we are cousins, we are brothers, whatever you want to call. There is a certain legacy of the tragedy of partition that will take a long time to work itself out. There's not much outsiders can do in this. You can take a diplomatic position. That doesn't really mean anything. That this is something that we have to sort it out. the tragedy of partition and its impact on our societies between India, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, those will have to be eventually sorted out by us, because much of the rest of the world doesn't even understand what animates Pakistan or what animates Bangladesh when it comes to India. So my advice, nobody's asking me, to our friends of Pakistan is, look, focus on development, because the magnificent obsessions, when a country or individuals, we get obsessed with one thing, then you forget the whole lot of other things in life. You need development, you need growth, you need technology. And if in your obsession with one issue, you neglect something as important as development, then I think the balance of power has shifted. Between India and Pakistan, India's GDP today is 10 times bigger than Pakistan. That has an effect on how others deal with India. I think that's the reality that's unfolding. And I think it will eventually, I would say, if Turkey sees more interest in India, as you know, it's short line and long line. Similarly, we are seeing if we have more positives that will outweigh the negatives, the structure will change.
Well, the answer to the question is actually very, very simple. The person to ask is not me. The person to ask who is to build this should be the business people. Because when business people talk to each other, they will find the path like electricity with least resistance to develop the appropriate financial systems. But at a broader level, yes, I would agree that there are changes taking place. I think there are tremendous technologies playing a very big role. I mean, in India, we have this fantastic thing called UPI, where you can make any payment you want from your telephone. I'm not suggesting that other countries don't have it, but maybe if we can find ways and means of marrying whatever the local system is in, let's say, Turkey or any other country, along with the Indian system, this would make interaction, this would make travel between the two countries, between any two countries, significantly simpler. So yes, there should be work in this direction. But all I'm trying to say is the governments can regulate as much as they want. It will not come into work or life unless businesses start using it. So the best way to do it is actually the other way around. Get businesses around the table, pose this question to them, and let them offer the solutions that they find best for themselves. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two guests and only 1 minute, please. First you, because you were the first raising your hand. Microphone? No microphone? Okay, okay. Louder, please.
Represented in a reformed Security Council, which in my view is going to be hypothetical for a very long time. It will not reform unless all these 5 goons there are going to change their position. Simple. They don't want to expand. They don't want to share the veto. Now, why should we expand the Security Council with the non-veto while you will still continue to have haves and have-nots? It's not going to serve the purpose. You might just be on the seat. Today we have the Arab seat. You become every month one country becomes a member, so you can do that. But it's not going to serve any purpose if we expand it with that. My question to you was: you know that India is the 2nd or 3rd largest Muslim nation in the world. Now, will Turkey, instead of taking the position in the coffee club, would look at India also as a country with a very large Muslim population to be represented in the UN Security Council?
Thank you. Let's have the other question, please, very short.
Yeah. Manish Chand, Center for Global India Insights. My question to Gürol Baba. You know, you spoke about Turkey interested in the Indo-Pacific, exploring. And earlier, Ambassador Muktesh Pardesi spoke about partnering in 3rd countries. How do you see the prospects? Where do you think India and Turkey work together in Indo-Pacific or in 3rd countries, in Africa or in other geographies? Thank you.
Thank you. First, let me go to Professor Acer.
Yes, actually, there is, first of all, a very good comment on how to reform the United Nations. unfortunately, as you say, if these 5 countries with veto power, if they don't want to change a single word in the UN Constitution, then there would be no change, unfortunately. Towards the demands of reforming the United Nations, the way they found to put some countries into the Security Council, I think they started with supporting Germany and Japan first. Then they had to support sometimes India, like Russia, for example, to become a full member of the Security Council. But unfortunately, they are still against any kind of giving veto power to any new member countries of the Security Council. That's why I think there is a stagnation, there is a deadlock in terms of reforming the United Nations with a real essence. So that's why I think some countries, including Turkey, are trying to find another way to dominate the powerful countries, at least within the United Nations. Of course, Turkey would be happy to support the India to become a full member of the Security Council. That I think that would be a step, but it's not going to be a solution to the major problem. So that's why, as I say, we need to collaborate more to explore how to pressure the powerful countries for a new system. We don't, as we had a panel in Italy last year, I think it was 2 years ago, and one of the participants said that, do we need a third world to change the United Nations, to create a new United Nations? I hope we would not need to have a third world, but I think we need to put more pressure on the powerful countries. That would be with the participation of India, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, before you, I think Professor will say something about the first question, right? Yes, please.
Look, I mean, the UN always gives fascinating arguments and counter-arguments. So we have the G4, we have the Coffee Club. But as a realist, I mean, I might be permitted to say this, neither of that is going to work. So it's like how many angels on a pin's head. We can keep arguing who should get it, what principles they should get it. But it's not going to happen. To be honest, Chinese are not going to let another Asian country in. You're not going to have the Brits and the French let the Germans or even say, look, hand over to the EU as a single representative. So I think we can fight over something that's never going to happen, because intellectually we can do that. I mean, we are universities and we can love doing that. But the fact is, Turkey today has influence in the Middle East, which is not going to come because it's a member of the Security Council or a stronger G8. It comes from Turkey's national power potential. India's weight in the international system will also come from its power potential, not sitting in the Security Council. It has some value. There's a diplomatic value, a diplomatist value. But beyond that, today, Turkey and India exercise influence without being part of the structure. Therefore, for us, I think, I would go back to the original principle, both you mentioned, he mentioned. How do we democratize the international system to the extent that we can? Don't get stuck on the UN issue, because it's not going to happen. There are a lot of people who come to Delhi or Foreign Office, constantly asking for checks that can't be cashed. Oh, everybody supports India's membership, but it's never going to happen. So I think focus on the practical cooperation in the regions where we can make a difference to our neighborhood, rather than worrying about this intellectual argument of how the UN is going to be reformed. I mean, I just want to add one small thing to something Professor Baba said. I think the West is not the one that is declining. It is the Europeans and the Japanese who have declined. The Americans are still at the 26% of the global GDP. Yeah, holding. So therefore, we have risen at the expense of Europe and Japan. And what is interesting is today, the attack on the West as the so-called Western structures is not coming from outside, it's coming from Trump himself. To see J.D. Vance's speech. So I think we got to see it's a far more complex structure there. Therefore, old slogans or old framing is not going to work. But what is true is countries like Turkey, India, Brazil, a whole lot of countries have emerged with significant power potential. The question is, how do we leverage that to our national benefit?
Thank you, Professor. And Professor Baba, please, the final words are in you.
All right, thank you. Well, I will be comfortably using the term middle power. I'm taking it from you, Professor Mohan. Not regional power, not becoming global power, but I'm going to use middle power. So my answer is going to be twofold. The first fold is a theoretical answer, and the second fold is going to be a little bit of empirical stuff. Regarding the theory, middle powers, like comfortably using Turkey and India, in order to operate functionally, they need two important elements. One, like-minded other middle powers that they think similarly and they would act similarly. And I think throughout this panel, that's what we have been talking about, like-mindedness. And that's what we are trying to foster here. Secondly, middle powers need institutions in order to operate more comfortably and together, not necessarily dominated by dominant or greater powers, but their own powers. A good example is to what extent it's functional, but is MICTA, all right? But let's say none of them are working. Then we have another important, conceptual pattern that we can use that is called trans-regionalism. Not inter-regionalism, but trans-regionalism, which does not require necessarily institutions or strong institutions, but bilateralism. And that's what we are talking about today. My empirical answer is going to touch upon that bilateralism, where Turkey would need India in the region in order to diversify its economic relations, deepen its clout in the region. Turkey would need it. Well, on the other side, the flip side of the coin, in the Middle East, and on the other front, let's call it in quote unquote the Western front, yes, there is complementarity, and India might need Turkey at the same time. So a few things, for example, infrastructure, for example, ports, railway, energy. Jabahar is one example. International now north-south transport corridor could be another. Well, there is also RCEP. We know Turkey touched upon BRICS Plus, not probably wholeheartedly a push, but did touch upon. So Turkish foreign policy makers are aware of the need to be a partner in those platforms. And there is one key element in Asian platforms, international, let's say regional Asian platforms. They are not as rigid as the Western regional organizations, such as the EU, such as NATO. They operate more like platforms, and Turkey would be a good partner in those platforms. So don't take it only from the perspective of economy. Yes, economy and business is very important, but as we know, if they operate under the auspices or the umbrella of the state, they would operate more comfortably in anywhere in the world. So not only don't take it for like investment and economic projects, but also institutionalization in an Asian way would be another part that we can follow from a trans-regional perspective.
Thank you, Professor. So it was a pleasure to conclude this panel. It was really conclusive, fruitful. And the second panel will be at 1400 hours, entitled Perspective on Global South. Again, we will have 4 distinguished speakers, yes, and expect all guests to present themselves in here to, participate in the discussions. Thank you so much, and enjoy your meal. Thank you.